Welcome to another video, Purple Political Talk here. Today is Wednesday, September 1st, 2021, and today we're going to be discussing the 2024 presidential election and be doing an update on one of the most likely and predictions that I do once a month because of its possibility of happening in 2024. This being a 2024 presidential scenario between Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and Vice President Kamala Harris. Based on where these candidates stand, it's very likely that we might see this be the matchup in 2024 and this be the electoral map that would be contested when it comes to that election. But before we do bring in this very interesting prediction, I want to remind you guys to like, subscribe, and to turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content, and also that channel memberships are now open. If you would like to become a Purple Political Talk channel member, you could do so by pressing the link down in the description or by pressing the subscribe button, the join button next to the subscribe tab. And in that spirit, I did want to give a very big thanks to our Purple Political Talk channel members, Adam Hurst and David Maxwell. We really could not do this without you. But now that we've gotten all of that out of the way, let's get started with the video. So I think that as we stand right now, we're getting closer to, 2022, we're getting closer to 2024. Ron DeSantis and Kamala Harris are both kind of in a tough place. And I would say that electorally, there might be some consequences to this. And, I think that truly what's going to really be impacting elections in 2024, for example, is more how well or how bad in a matter the Biden administration is doing. And at a political level, that's going to be probably the biggest deal. And I think this election in 2024, it may be more of a referendum on the Biden administration as a whole, the Democratic Party in control over issues. I think that we've had elections where issues have been a central part in the past. However, I think that as of recent times, these elections have become less based on the issues. The issues are somewhat important, but more of anti-campaigns. I'm against terrorists. I'm against DeSantis. So that's mostly what we're seeing. And as things stand right now, you can make the argument that both of these candidates could be having trouble. And I mean, it comes down to the fact that since they are the, front runners in a way of these races, it's, they're being covered heavily and, scrutinized for certain things. And, I think it's actually a good thing because that might actually give us new candidates when it comes to 2024. But in general terms, the safe states haven't changed. What we're going to see change is these likely states, these lean states, these toss-up states as we get further into this prediction, because I think that's where the big changes are. But at a very general level, we haven't seen any particular changes when it comes to the actual, electoral, map when it comes to a lot of these safe states. Generally speaking, these states are going to stay the same. They're voting consistently, and there's very little that either party could do to win in certain of these states. Like, it's going to be very hard for Ron DeSantis to win in California, and it's going to be very hard for Kamala Harris to win in Wyoming, for example. So I think that kind of illustrates right now where the safe states are. I think they've stayed the same, and we really haven't had any developments that, at least in the safe state level, would change much. But now that we've covered the safe states, let's move on to the likely states. These are states that would go to either prospective party by around a margin of 5 to 15%. So that's a very wide range. And these are going to be generally closer states, but those states that are close but not quite there yet for either party, further into one of the other party's column. But let's start off with the Democrats. So at this point, the Democrats have built solid places or bases in many states. Among them, Virginia. Northern Virginia is a place right now where the Democrats are doing so well. The Democrats are building up the support in Northern Virginia to the point that it's going to be very hard for any candidate to win. And, Ron DeSantis is someone who could do very well in Southern Virginia, like we're seeing Glenn Youngkin do, like we saw Donald Trump himself do. But ultimately, Northern Virginia just has so much more weight politically in Virginia that it's going to hand Kamala Harris a victory, and by a lot. Kamala Harris is really popular in Northern Virginia. Establishment Democrats, moderate voters to a certain extent that have become more left-leaning. So I think a lot of those voters in Northern Virginia, which are going to be a deciding factor kind of in Virginia, are going to end up voting for Kamala Harris. A lot of these other states in the same column, in the same kind of area, Colorado, I would go as far as saying New Mexico. These are states that have built Democratic coalitions that are very strong. And ultimately, I think the 5% margin is actually like a lot lower than people think. And 5% is hard to get in swing states, but places like New Mexico and Colorado have established bases with, a lot of, Democratic voters. Now, what might become an issue in the state of New Mexico? In New Mexico, the biggest issue might be, and it could happen, but as of right now, I don't see it happening, in the present. Again, like I said, it could happen in the future, is Hispanic voters. If Hispanic voters start flocking away from the Democratic Party, like they did in 2020, and that trend continues, the Democrats are in trouble in places like New Mexico. But as of right now, I would say that stays the same. The last state I did want to include in this column was Minnesota, and I think this is a state that some people overestimate Republicans. I really do think that the Democrats just have a pretty solid hold on these states, and I think that at a cultural level, when it comes to like a political culture in the Midwest, I think Minnesota is one of the states that starts to, further himself from the other states in the rest. Well, Minnesota is a state that at this point has very socially liberal points of views. They have some more, moderate to right-leaning Republican, I guess, economic views, but generally speaking, a lot of those cultural things are really going to be impactful. But moving into 2024, I cannot understate the fact that the economy may be a big issue. COVID-19 may still be an issue. And if that is the case, the economy and the board, the map is completely redrawn, because it's not going to be pretty if COVID and the economy are bad come 2024 for the Democrats. Now let's talk about Ron DeSantis and where he would excel. So I think I see Ron DeSantis doing very well in places like Texas. I see him doing extremely well in Iowa and Ohio. And I would go as far as saying it doing very good in Florida. So what's one of the things that these states have in common? They really heavily dislike Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris could do very well in only certain parts of Texas, not everywhere. And you need to win everywhere in Texas if you're a Democrat and you want to have the relative shot at winning. And I think that honestly, Ron DeSantis is a strong candidate for a lot of Texan voters, and ultimately might be the winning factor, I guess, for the Republicans in the state. As for Iowa and Ohio, it really just comes down to the fact that, these states have voted consistently Republican. Year over year, they've turned out to be more and more Republican. You've had one or two races here and there that have gone to the Democrats, but on a more general perspective, especially the presidential level, you're seeing them go for Republicans. And again, Kamala Harris is not the type of person to even have a shot of winning here. With Iowa and Ohio, what has really happened is rural populations, which make up a very big amount of the state electorate, have shifted away from the Democratic Party, and ultimately that is what's causing a lot of trouble for the Democrats. And Ron DeSantis and Kamala Harris will continue those trends. DeSantis will continue to gain in these rural areas while Harris continues to struggle. Going down to Florida, Ron DeSantis' home state. This place is interesting just because of Ron DeSantis' recent, debacle with masks and things like that, which, at a general perspective, I don't think it's going to have as much of an impact as people think on Florida. It's going to have some impact. I can't understate that, Ron DeSantis' rhetoric on masks will impact him in certain ways. However, what we must realize is that in Florida, these voters are probably going to vote for DeSantis over anyone at a presidential level. I really find it hard to see Kamala Harris winning here. She is deeply unpopular in Miami-Dade County, in all the southern Florida counties, up in Hillsborough, up in Pinellas, where it really matters so the Democrats can have a decent margin and not get blown out in the state. Kamala Harris will be unpopular, and I really do see Ron DeSantis in home state. I think he could take it, and I think a lot of people underestimate Ron DeSantis when it comes to his governor's chances and things like that. And I think all of that will just add up to him being popular enough to win here by a likely margin, which is something we haven't seen from either party actually in quite a while. So that covers all our likely states. Let's move on to lean states, which are states that go by less than 5%, but more than 1.5%. So again, getting relatively closer, let's start off with two districts that I think could be lean. Maine 2nd and Nebraska. So these two districts are actually pretty interesting in my opinion. Nebraska's 2nd district has become more and more liberal as time progresses, and I think that it's going to be pretty hard to see a non-Democrat winning here. As for in Maine, I think the Republicans have built such a good base here, but this district, again, could be redistricted. Something could happen to it, but in a more general perspective, I do see, the Republicans doing somewhat well with DeSantis in Maine. So those two districts are important to a certain extent in a very tight electoral scenario, which, looking at how things are now politically, 2024 is going to be a very tight political environment. So that extra electoral vote could be important. So those are our two districts. Let's move on to our lean states for Kamala Harris. So at this point, I do see Kamala Harris winning in Nevada by a lean margin. I think that's a place where, she can maybe expand from where Joe Biden was. I think the Republicans have the ability to build a base here. However, I think that there's still going to be a lot of challenges present for them. And I think it's a more of an organization thing, excitement thing in the state that is really going to cost them a victory there. And I think that's kind of where Kamala Harris's luck ends when it comes to, lean states. As for Ron DeSantis, I see him doing very well against Kamala Harris in areas like the Midwest. I don't think Kamala Harris has the Midwestern appeal necessary to win in the Midwest. And ultimately, I think he takes Wisconsin and Pennsylvania in the lean column. And I think he also takes the state of North Carolina. I really do think that these are states that would really like someone like DeSantis. And with the exception of North Carolina with Kamala Harris and her certain appeals to African-American voters, I think that with the white working class, which are prevalent voters in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina, I think Ron DeSantis could do very well in those states and take those by a lean margin. So that covers all our lean states, relatively closer states. Let's discuss our 4 toss-up states: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, and New Hampshire. I don't even know why I was about to say North Hampshire. Disregard that, please. So in these states, I think that we're looking at a very interesting race. Remember, tilt margins are less than 1.5%, so very close. I think ultimately what ends up happening here is, I think Ron DeSantis could do very well down in Arizona. I think he could do well in Georgia. Again, remember, these 2 states went very narrowly to Ron DeSantis back in, or to Donald Trump rather, or to Joe Biden. These seats went very narrowly to Joe Biden in 2020, and I think that Ron DeSantis is the type of candidate to probably flip it back. I mean, he still does have that Trumpish rhetoric that could get him in trouble with a lot of voters in these states. However, I do think that, at a general perspective, it's going to be easier for DeSantis to win here than, lose. And ultimately, the reason why Trump lost in these states wasn't so much because his ideas were unpopular and things like that. It's just more Trump the candidate. And truly, I don't think Kamala Harris is the right candidate for anywhere in the country where you need to win. Hence, the Sun Belt and the Rust Belt. So I think Arizona and Georgia are 2 good examples of that. Moving on to the last 2 states, Michigan and, New Hampshire. I think Michigan very narrowly ends up going and voting for Kamala Harris by a tilt margin. I still think that she could keep some of the Biden support, but mostly I think she could do very well in Detroit suburbs and Detroit itself and get those voters out. And I think Michigan stays blue with Kamala Harris. And I think Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, they would go very narrowly in the lean margin, so probably like 1.5, 1.6, 1.7%. So I think that's where those states fall. And interestingly enough, I think this is a call I haven't made in a long time. In red New Hampshire, I do think that Ron DeSantis very narrowly wins in New Hampshire. I think he's the type of candidate to win here against someone like Harris, who could be deemed more unpopular in the state, who could really face certain consequences for being too liberal, and sometimes I just think being a little bit unlikable. I think that's where she would pay the price for that. And at a general perspective, what can we see from this map? Very good map for the Republicans. Why? Because the general environment, and this is an overlying theme of this prediction, the general environment is currently strong for the Republicans, especially with someone like Kamala Harris on the ticket. Gonna be pretty hard for Ron DeSantis to lose in my eyes. Now, things can change, and this is, remember, as of September 1st, 2021, and things are bound to change. The Democrats could perform, the Republicans could underperform, anything could really happen. But what is for certain now is that 2024 is going to be a very interesting election, and it will be a close one. So, very interesting video in my opinion. Tell me what you think down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a huge thumbs up, like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. And again, hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one, and goodbye.